Welcome to Ignite 2023. My name is Plyshette Wiggins, and I am here to tell you about how writing saves my life. I am a professional writer. I am also a public health expert focusing on breast cancer awareness and early detection. You've probably seen me here at Ignite a couple of times doing some of my surveys, so thank you for all who've done that before. Now, I'd like to share with you how writing saves my life. The purpose of this presentation is to talk about relationships, mental and emotional health, family and faith, and how God is love. Through intentional journaling, I encourage you to acknowledge loss and grief, take the next best step that helps propel you to health and wellness. Excuse me. So I'd like to start with a verse, Matthew 22, verses 36 through 40. It says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love God with all your heart and soul, with all my siblings and my parents." And we didn't know which camera to look at. There were so many people taking pictures, and everybody's pointing. And I think that this picture signifies our perfect love for each other, and just the fact that we're just like so chaotic. As you can imagine, a family with 13 kids. It means a lot of grandkids and a lot of different things going on. One of my favorite parts about the picture is that it captures the essence of who we are. A little dysfunctional, crazy, but also happy. Like everybody's smiling in this picture as we were joking and trying to figure out which camera to look at. As I said, my parents welcomed people into the family, including Kenneth Wiggins. I met Kenny when I was 18 years old, and we married on September 6th in 2003. We had two beautiful children, Anaya and Michaela Wiggins. And here is where I want to begin talking about my grief journey. In 2013, in May of 2013, my father passed away. He had been ill for some time on hospice care. Later that year, I found out that I would be losing my job. And in August of that year, I found out I would be losing my job. And then a couple of weeks later, Kenny was diagnosed with leukemia. And shockingly and surprisingly to all of us, he passed away. We were not expecting it. So in a matter of 100 days or so, I lost my dad, my job, and my husband. On the day Kenny died, my family was with me. My mom was with me in the hospital when we found out that he died. And it was a shock to the system, as you can imagine, because no one was expecting this. And I can remember looking up and seeing my mom. And in that moment, I saw the image of God through her. Like her strength was unparalleled. People were around her, screaming, crying. I was dry heaving, because this was such a shock to my system. And just when I had reached the point where I was gonna, raise up, and raise hell a little bit, I'll be honest. My mom, I looked up and I saw her, a woman who had just lost her husband of 59 years and now lost one of her sons, although, Kenny was her son-in-law, but he was like a son to her. And she just stood strong, comforting the young kids and Kenny's cousins who were there, comforting me. And I'm just like, wow, this woman, it's just amazing. It's just crazy how God showed himself to me through her. And in that moment, I heard that song, Let the Church Say Amen. Let the church say amen. God has spoken. Let the church say amen. And I was reminded of a scripture, Ecclesiastes 3:14, that God doesn't make mistakes. Everything he does is forever. And he does it so that we would know who he is. And so in that moment, I was able to stand up. I was able to trust God and know that Kenny's death, while shocking and unbearable, wasn't a mistake. It was something that I would have to go through. And in the coming days, God told me that as long as I stayed with him, he would stay with me. That as long as I turned to him, he would be with me. Not to turn to alcohol, not to turn to drugs, sex, or anything like that, but to turn to him, to turn to his word. He would be with me and guide me through my grief journey. And what I found in losing my dad and then losing my husband, prior to that, I had one of my brothers, Michael Bethea, passed away in 2008. And prior to Michael's death, I experienced one of my first losses personally. It was my first pregnancy ended in miscarriage. And how I grieved that pregnancy was not good. I was angry. I was bitter. I was jealous of anyone and everyone who had kids, and I couldn't understand why I had done all the right things. I married. I got pregnant, and I lost the baby. So I was, I was a mess. I stayed in the anger stage of grief for far too long. And then losing my brother Mike and then losing other people along the way, I began to realize that we all grieve differently. How I related to the loss of the pregnancy is different than how other people maybe relate to grief and suffering. And I think it's okay. It's okay to grieve differently. And then especially in 2013, I lost my dad. I was 39 years old when my father died. He was there at all my graduations. He walked me down the aisle. He fixed my cars. He helped me through relationship troubles and problems and guided me through things with work. And as I became an adult, my children were 3 and 8 years old when they lost their dad. And so how they related to grief and the loss of a father is totally different in the experiences. And so as I watched other people around me grieve, I realized how relative grief is. My dad, as I said, my dad and Kenny passed away. And then the following March in 2014, my 21-year-old nephew, John Unique Jackson, passed away in his sleep. So within a matter of 6 months, my family had tremendous loss, tremendous grief. And then following deaths in 2014, that made it really unbearable. And I realized that there's no right or wrong way to grieve, that there are no benefits in comparison, like how, my oldest daughter at the time didn't express her grief through tears. And I remember talking to her about it because she felt like, what did it mean that she didn't cry? And I'm like, oh, it's okay. You will grieve when you grieve, and how you grieve is your business, and how you do it is yours. You don't have to compare yourself to everyone else who's crying. And so that was a lesson for me that grief is very relative. And I shared some of those lessons on Facebook and in my journal. And as I shared on Facebook, people began to tell me how I was encouraging them. And so I started a blog in 2014. I am living through it, and you can too. And in this blog, I talk about grief, my grief journey. I share some of my poetry. As a creative writer, since I've been a kid, I write poems, short stories, and journaling. Journaling has really been my thing. It's what I do. And so as I think about journaling and how writing has helped me through my grief journey, I think about the stages of grief. There's 7 or 5 stages depending on which model you follow. But this model shows how it's like a curve, like maybe you go through denial or anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, disbelief, and shock. But, for me and for most people, it's not a curve. You don't go from one stage to the next. You kind of go all over the place. Like 1 minute you're in denial, then the next minute you're angry, then the next minute you're bargaining. You're like, God, please, do this. If you do this for me, then I'll do this. Or you're just in disbelief. And for me, when, as I said, like the day Kenny died, looking at my mother and seeing God through her, there was a certain level of acceptance that I felt like, God doesn't make mistakes. Kenny's death, while seemed incredibly, just wrong to us, it was right for God. And so I accepted it. But then, days later, I would be crying out like, oh my God, like, how did this happen? Like, why did this happen? And then I would be in disbelief and shock, and I would be going back and forth and around and around and, unraveling my feelings. And how I got through grief is one of the ways is through journaling. And this is a quote that I found some time ago by Rabbi Earl Groman, and he counseled. He was like a national grief counselor for, I think it was school shootings or different things that happened. And one thing he said is that the only cure for grief is to grieve. And from that and through my grief journey, I found, as I said, that grief, this is excerpts from my book, Love and Love, A Poetic Journey Through Grief, Love, and Loss, that grief is relative. Grief is individual. Grief is unpredictable. Grief is deep sorrow. Grief is love. And grief is about how we relate to the person, place, or thing that is deceased or gone. So again, one of the things that helped me manage my time through grief and through the stages of grief is journaling and writing. Like first, I started on Facebook sharing my thoughts, and I was encouraged to start a blog, so I started a blog, and then I wrote a poetry book, and I continue to journal. I continue to post on my blog. But one thing that I do daily is journal, and journaling is a simple and low-cost way to express yourself. And now that I'm an adult, when I was a kid and I kept a diary, it was more about what happened at school or what my parents did to upset me or different things like that. It was about today is Monday, it's raining, or, it's nighttime. It was more about capturing the events of the day. As I grew older, I began to use journaling to express myself, to say things that I wouldn't say out loud. Like I was always been a better writer in communication styles, writer better than speaker. So journaling came a way for me to express myself. And also, I didn't know it at the time as a teenager and as a young adult that it was a way to improve my mental health. So it helped me be aware of who I am and the things that were happening around me, to me, and helped me along my life journey. That definitely became very beneficial during my grief journey. And it's like what people say that God doesn't use anything, everything he does has a reason. So about intentional journaling, what research or WebMD says about the mental health benefits of journaling is that it can reduce anxiety, it helps with brooding or racing thoughts, it creates awareness, it regulates emotions, and it encourages us to open up, and it can speed up our physical healing. One of the things that journaling, one thing that really helps me with is when I'm brooding or when I have racing thoughts. Sometimes I just pick up a pen and paper and I write down everything that is racing through my head. And the more I write down the things that are racing through my head, the more I, come back to like, well, why am I thinking about this? Why is this? Why is this? And the more I write through how I feel, it definitely gives me an awareness. It definitely helps me regulate my emotions. And, I've been doing this for a long time. As I said, I started from a kid. And journaling has really been helpful to me in a way to help me unravel all that's built up inside of me and then to show me love. But that's me. But what about you? Like, if you're interested in journaling, what do you do? Where do you start? Who, what, when, why? Journaling, right? It's amazing how you can find YouTube videos and different things to tell you, like, how to start journaling or different things. So some of the things that I want to share from my experience with journaling is that, of course, there is digital journaling, there's manual journaling, there's apps that you can use to journal. You can do digital journaling just in terms of using the notes program on your phone, or you can download an app that helps you journal. There is video journaling apps. There's different ways, and I think that you have to find what's best for you. And then there's the manual old school pen and paper way, my favorite way to journal. And then there's dated journals, there's prayer journals, there's prompts, and I think that journaling can be as easy or as hard as you want it to be. So as easy as today I feel sad, and that's all you write, right? That's it. Then next time, maybe you don't write for another week, but then you write and you say, okay, so a week has passed, and now the sun is shining, and I went to get my hair done, or whatever happens, like you have to start somewhere and then figure out how often you want to journal and how and what works for you. So I want to share some examples from journals that, some examples from journals that I have. I still can't believe Kenny is gone. I miss him so much. Another day I wrote, it's cold, wet, and yucky outside. I went to Dunkin' Donuts. I pulled out of the drive-thru without my coffee. So now I either had to get back in line, go back through the long drive-through line, or get out in the car in the cold, and my hair wasn't feeling getting out of the car. So that was one day. It was one of those days probably where I had a race in mind and so much going on and doing a lot. Another entry. Today, Anaya joined the basketball team at school. Kenny would have been so proud. Another entry. God, I'm so mad. Why did you do this? It hurts so much. And so I pulled these entries out because I think it really shows the journey through the stages of grief. 1 minute I'm in acceptance, accepting that Kenny would be proud that Anaya joined the team. The next minute I'm just like, oh my God, why'd you do this? Back to denial. And then there's another part, where you take it out on other people or other people affect your feelings. This last one says the cashier at Target really pissed me off. She did X, Y, and Z. I won't tell you guys. And I don't know why she has to be so rude. So I think that how we relate to others and how we interpret our grief and how that looks to other people is something that we have to evaluate. And for me, journaling helped me evaluate what that meant. And so in my poetry book, Love and Love, I'm very transparent about how my grief journey, the poems are a reflection of what I felt. There's poems that are about relationships. There's poems about me and Kenny. There's poems about my family, about love. And in chapter 1, I talk about relationships, how important it is to get to know God for yourself and to reintroduce yourself to yourself. When I began journaling as a kid, I was a kid. When I journaled in college, it was, about college stuff. And when Kenny passed away, prior to Kenny passing away, I was a married woman with 2 young children, working full time, managing the house. So my journal entries were pretty much like, oh my God, I wish Kenny would, what's for dinner, or why didn't Kenny make dinner? It was stuff like that. And then after that, the journal was about me. What I had to find out about myself was reintroducing myself to myself, not as a married woman, but now as a widowed young adult woman with 2 kids. So journaling helped me, reassess myself and reintroduce myself. And then in journaling, I write about how I relate to others, family, friends, neighbors, and coworkers. And so in addition to the poetry book, I just published a workbook to the poetry book that talks about these things as relative to the chapters in my poetry book. So in chapter 2, it's all about emotional and mental health. I use a cup as a metaphor. We all know that we can't pour from an empty cup. We've heard that a lot. But one day I was in my kitchen, I was in the cabinet, and I happened to look up and see it was maybe 3 cups from the first set of dishes that Kenny and I ever bought together. And the cups, I had moved, we moved several times, and now Kenny's been gone 10 years, and now here these cups are still up in the cabinet. And I'm like, oh, we don't even use those. They're too high for my kids to use, and they're empty. And I felt as empty as the cup. Like, I felt empty that day. Like, there are times as, being a part of a big family, my family and friends showed up, people were around me, but I felt alone, I felt empty, and I wrote poetry about that. And then as I experienced grief and death, I wrote about how cracked I felt in my resolve, like I just can't take another loss. And even though I was grieving and having going through all of this, I also a lot of people leaned on me, and I also offered myself to a lot of people to help them through their grief journey. As I said, I started the blog, I shared my experiences, and I was okay with that until I wasn't okay with that. And so I was pouring from an empty cup, and I was feeling very empty and all cracked up. And through that, God helped me. He helped me realize God filled me up. Like then there's a poem that talks about how God filled me up. And one of the things that also helped me was setting boundaries, right? In chapter 3, I talk about family and faith, expectations, honesty, integrity, priorities, service, purpose. Again, it's all about relationships and how we relate to others, how we relate to God and ourselves. So the poems in this chapter talk about that. And then in the workbook, there's questions that encourage people, readers, writers, to explore these things for themselves. And the last chapter is God is Love. And this is a poem that I wrote. It's called Sunrise by Plyshette. On my darkest days, the sun didn't rise. I watched it rise. I searched for sun rays, but I was left in a daze. Darkness blocked my way until the sun reminded me that he is the one, the only begotten Son. He said, I created the sun. I told it to rise. Stop believing lies. The sun has risen. And so this poem is a reflection of my faith and how God helped me on my darkest days. and showed me that again and again that God is love, and that with His love I can get through anything. And my in my grief journey, and how I hope to encourage others through grieving, is that you must go through it. That you can't get over it. You know, alcohol, drugs, sex, food doesn't take away the fact that someone is gone or something is gone from your life. You can't get over it. That's my take. It's how I live through my grief, is that I have to live through it. And so this is an example from the workbook, some of the questions that are included. The first one really, again, relates to the first chapter in the poetry book. And one of the I learned early in grief, especially for my children, is that it's important to say the names of the loved, the people who are gone, because it's how we remember them. Because my children were so young when their dad died, and people sometimes didn't want to talk about Kenny in front of them because they didn't want to make them cry, they didn't want to make us sad, and they didn't want to make me cry and make me sad. But even though I encourage people to talk about them, because if it helps them remember them, and it helps us remember them, it helps us through grief. So in the workbook, I talk about how do you feel when someone says your loved one's name, and be honest about that. Be honest about what you're going through and what you're feeling, and talk with yourself about how you feel about that. Talk with God about how you feel about that. And recently, I published a collection of journals called Be Encouraged. In these journals, the workbook has prompts pretty much that you answer questions. These journals are blank. They can be applied to grief or not grief. The first one is memories. The second one is honesty and relationships. And here they are right here, available on Amazon and also on my website. This is an example of them. And they're just pretty much blank journals, but they're titled based relative to my grief journey, but they're not about grief. They're blank. Hope that makes sense. So remember, grief is relative, grief is individual, grief is unpredictable, grief is deep sorrow, grief is love. Grief is about how we relate to the person, place, or thing that is deceased or gone. And the only way to grieve is to grieve. The only cure for grief is to grieve. And then there's also some grief coping skills. So, seek help, get support when you need it. There's so many memes and different things on social media. This one says, sometimes talking to your friend is all the therapy you need. But sometimes after talking to your friend, you need therapy. So I would encourage people to try journaling, try intentional journaling. It's definitely been a benefit for me, and I hope that I've shared enough with you that it encourages you to see that it can be a benefit for you. One of the other things that helped me through my grief journey is talking with my pastor and church leaders about grief and about what I'm going through. And then the third thing that has been a tremendous help to me is therapy. Seeking counseling by a mental health professional, a licensed clinical therapist, has truly been helpful for me. And I'd like to share a poem called Make the Call by Plyshette. The sky is blue, not absolute blue. There are shades to blue, just like my mood. It fades from slightly blue, just sad enough, yet still able to do stuff. When my mood is shady, blue turns to gray. Darkness becomes my day. Reckless thoughts are spinning. Depression is winning. Peace, be still. I cry out for his will. Depression battles are real. My spirit concedes. Help is what I need. I am not alone. I pick up the phone. I make the call. And I like to share that through my grief journey, through the past 10 years, that initially I sought counseling for my children, for myself. I've been in therapy several times over the years. And I think that this poem is really about knowing when you need to get help. And then sometimes we don't know that we need to get help and we just cry out. But I would encourage people to consider professional counseling, mental health counseling, professional counseling, because sometimes it's the help that we need. It's the voice of someone not related to us, someone not connected to us, that can really help us and give us coping tools and skills to get through it. If it's not, it doesn't have to be grief. It can be anything. I would just encourage people to, try mental health counseling as it works and see if it works for you. So I am living through it, and you can too. This is my book, Love and Love by Plyshette. I have a poetry book, a workbook, journals, pens, and so much more, stop by my table and or visit me at liverightthroughit.com. Writing saves my life. And if you're here at night, please come to my table. And this is a special offer. You can get $10 off of merchandise of purchase of $40 or more. And again, connect with me on social media at Yvonne Plyshette on Facebook and Instagram. I also professionally write grants for nonprofit organizations, and you can also find out more information on www.liverightthroughit. Thank you.